Before the sun had a chance to peek over the rooftops, she was already awake. Not because of an alarm, she couldn't afford to waste battery on something so small, but because her body had learned to rise with the quiet hum of the city stirring outside. The air in her tiny apartment was still cool, carrying the faint scent of damp laundry and yesterday's rice. She lay there for a moment, eyes open, listening to the soft, uneven breaths of her son in the next room. That sound, sometimes steady, sometimes catching, was the metronome of her life. She swung her legs over the edge of the mattress, wincing as her bare feet touched the cold linoleum. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Hunger had become a familiar companion, something she could tuck into the background like static on an old radio. She'd gotten good at pretending it wasn't there, at least in front of him. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle with water from the tap and set it on the stove. No coffee today. She'd run out 2 days ago and hadn't replaced it. Instead, she'd stir a spoonful of sugar into hot water and call it tea. It wasn't much, but it warmed her hands, and sometimes that was enough. While she waited for the water to boil, she opened the small tin on the counter, the one with the chipped red lid. Inside were coins, a few crumpled bills, and a folded receipt from the pharmacy. She counted it again, even though she knew the number by heart. Still short. Always short. Her son needed medicine. Not the kind you pick up with a coupon or find on sale at the corner store. This was special. Prescribed after weeks of coughing that wouldn't quit. After nights spent sitting upright in a plastic chair beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall like a fragile bird's. The doctor had been kind but firm. Without this, his lungs could weaken. He might not grow strong enough to keep up with other kids. She'd nodded, eyes dry, jaw tight. She didn't tell the doctor that other kids wore shoes that fit and had backpacks that weren't held together with duct tape. She didn't need to. She worked cleaning offices downtown, floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights, desks where people left half-finished lattes and sticky notes with reminders like, call mom or buy concert tickets. She'd wipe those surfaces clean, careful not to read too much, careful not to imagine the lives behind them. Her shift started at 4 a.m. and ended just before sunrise. Then she'd take the bus home, walk the last 6 blocks because the fare didn't stretch that far, and collapse onto the couch for an hour before her son woke up. Some days she didn't even take off her shoes. Lately she'd started skipping lunch. Not because she forgot, she never forgot, but because every dollar saved was a step closer to that little inhaler with the blue cap. She'd tell herself, just one more day without eating and I'll be there. But the price kept creeping up. The pharmacy clerk, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, had started slipping her extra tissues or a granola bar when no one was looking. She never said thank you out loud. Pride was one of the few things she still owned, but she'd nod. Just once, and tuck the kindness away like a secret. That morning, as she sipped her sugar water, she heard a cough from the other room. Not the usual sleepy one, but a deeper, wetter sound that made her set the cup down fast. She moved quietly into his room. He was still asleep, curled under a thin blanket, his face pale even in the dim light. She knelt beside the bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His skin was warm, not feverish, but not cool either. She watched his breathing, counting the seconds between each inhale. Too long, too shallow. She stayed there until the sky turned gray-blue, until the first school bus rumbled down the street. Only then did she stand, her knees stiff, and go back to the kitchen. She reheated yesterday's rice, added a splash of soy sauce, and packed it into his lunchbox. She didn't put anything in for herself. When he woke, she'd smile and say she'd already eaten. He'd believe her. He always did. He was 8 years old, with eyes too old for his face and a laugh that still surprised her. Bright and sudden, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He loved drawing spaceships and collecting bottle caps, convinced each one was a rare treasure. He didn't know about rent deadlines or insurance denials. He didn't know that his mother sometimes sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was enough to keep someone alive. And she prayed he never would. She helped him into his jacket, the one with the small tear near the pocket that she'd sewn with red thread, and walked him to the bus stop. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet pavement and distant bread from the bakery. He chattered about a dream he'd had, about flying over the city on the back of a giant turtle. She listened, nodding, squeezing his hand when he paused for breath. At the stop, he hugged her quickly, then climbed onto the bus without looking back. She watched until it turned the corner, then turned toward the bus that would take her downtown. The ride was quiet. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching storefronts blur past. A man across the aisle offered her a piece of gum. She shook her head with a small smile. Her stomach twisted again, but she focused on the rhythm of the wheels, the sway of the bus, the thought of the tin on her counter. Just a few more days. Just a few more shifts. At work, she changed into her uniform, a faded blue smock that never quite fit right, and got to work. Vacuuming, wiping, scrubbing. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind kept drifting back to that cough. She imagined the inhaler sitting on the pharmacy shelf waiting. She imagined her son running without stopping, laughing without wheezing. She imagined a day when she could buy groceries without calculating every penny. By the time her shift ended, her back ached and her feet burned. She walked home slowly, the city lights flickering on around her. In her pocket, she felt the crumpled bills from her tips, $3, maybe $4. Not much, but it was something. She passed the pharmacy on her way, slowing just enough to glance through the window. The lights were off, closed. She kept walking. Back in the apartment, she heated water again. This time she didn't add sugar. She sat at the table, the tin open in front of her, and counted everything one last time. Still not enough. But closer. She closed the lid, placed it back on the counter, and went to bed hungry again because tomorrow was another day, and maybe, just maybe, it would be the day everything changed. The rain started just after midnight, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the window like it had something urgent to say. She lay awake listening to it, one arm draped over the edge of the mattress, fingers brushing the floor where a small puddle had formed from a leak in the ceiling. She'd stuffed a towel up there weeks ago, but it was soaked through now, useless. Water kept finding a way in, no matter how hard she tried to keep it out. She turned onto her side and looked toward the doorway. Down the hall, her son's room was quiet. Too quiet. The usual soft whistling sound of his breath was gone, replaced by something tighter, thinner. She held her own breath for a second, straining to hear. There it was again, a shallow gasp like he was trying to pull air through a straw. Her chest tightened. She got up without making a sound, padding barefoot down the hall, her nightgown clinging to her shoulders from the damp air. He was sitting up in bed, eyes half open, one hand pressed to his chest. Not crying, not panicking, just still, like he was conserving every ounce of energy. She sat beside him, rubbing his back in slow circles. "Breathe with me," she whispered, inhaling deeply, then letting it out slow. He tried to copy her, but his breath hitched halfway through. She reached for the half-used inhaler on the nightstand, shook it gently and pressed it to his lips. One puff, then another. They waited. His shoulders dropped just a little. Not much, but enough. She stayed with him until his eyelids grew heavy again, until his breathing settled into something that almost passed for normal. Only then did she slip back to her room, her own lungs feeling tight with worry. Sleep didn't come. Instead, she stared at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering how much longer they could keep patching things together. Morning arrived, gray and dripping. She made rice again, less this time, stretching it with water, and packed his lunch with extra care, folding the napkin into a little boat like he liked. He ate slowly, pushing the grains around his bowl. "Not hungry?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. He shook his head. She didn't push. She knew that feeling too well. At the bus stop, he leaned against her, his small frame warm through her thin jacket. "Will you be home when I get back?" he asked. She hesitated. She had a double shift today, 16 hours straight, but she couldn't tell him that. Not when his eyes were already shadowed with tiredness. "Of course," she said, smoothing his hair. "I'll be waiting." She wasn't. By the time his bus pulled away, she was already walking in the opposite direction, heading downtown through puddles that soaked the hem of her pants. The rain had let up, but the air clung to her skin like a wet blanket. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She'd eaten nothing since yesterday's sugar water, and even that felt like a luxury now. Work was worse than usual. The building's heating had broken overnight, and the marble floors were icy underfoot. Her hands turned red from the cold water she used to mop the lobby. A manager passed by, muttering about slipping hazards, and she nodded, scrubbing harder. At lunchtime, her one break, she sat in the supply closet, knees pulled to her chest, listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside. She pulled a cracker from her pocket, The last one she'd saved from last week's grocery run. She ate it slowly, savoring each crumb, pretending it was a feast. Then her phone buzzed. The pharmacy. Her heart jumped into her throat. She answered with a quiet hello, and the voice on the other end was polite but firm. Just calling to let you know the price on the inhaler went up again. New insurance rules, it's almost double what it was last month. She didn't speak for a long moment. The number he gave her felt like a punch to the gut. She'd been so close. She'd counted every coin, skipped every meal, sold the one thing she swore she'd never part with, her mother's silver locket, the only thing she had left that smelled faintly of jasmine and old stories. She'd handed it over to a pawnshop owner who barely looked at her and walked away with just enough to cover half the dose. Now even that wasn't enough. Is there any way to get it cheaper? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, the man said. We can hold it for a few days, but he didn't finish. He didn't need to. She hung up and sat there in the dim closet, the cracker taste turning bitter in her mouth. Outside, the world kept moving. People laughing in the break room, elevators dinging, phones ringing. No one knew. No one saw the way her hands shook as she tucked the phone back into her pocket. That evening, after her second shift ended, she walked to the pharmacy anyway. Not to buy, she didn't have the money, but just to look. The inhaler sat behind the glass case, small and blue, looking so ordinary. She pressed her palm against the cool glass as if she could absorb its promise through touch. The clerk saw her and gave a small, sad nod. She turned away before her eyes could betray her. Back home, she found her son asleep on the couch, a drawing of a rocket ship clutched in his hand. She carried him to bed, tucking the blanket around his shoulders. His breathing was shallow again. She sat beside him for a long time, watching, waiting, wishing she could trade places with him, take the tightness into her own chest so he wouldn't have to feel it. Later, at the kitchen table, she opened the coffee tin. The money inside looked pitifully small under the flickering bulb. She added the few dollars from her tips, then closed the lid. Still not enough. Never enough. She pulled out a sheet of notebook paper, the kind her son used for school, and began to write. Dear nurse, she started, then crossed it out. Tried again. Hi, this is her son's name's Mom. He might need to stay home tomorrow. He's having trouble breathing again, and I haven't been able to get his medicine yet. I'm trying. I really am. She read it over, her vision blurring. She folded it carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and set it by the door. She didn't cry. Crying used up energy she couldn't spare. Instead, she washed the single plate in the sink, hung the damp towel back over the leak, and lay down on the couch fully clothed. The rain had started again, tapping gently on the roof. She closed her eyes and made a silent promise. Not to God, not to the universe, but to herself. Tomorrow I'll find a way, even if it meant walking farther, working longer, giving up more. Even if it meant going another day with nothing in her stomach but hope. Because what else was there? Hope was the only thing she had left that couldn't be priced. She woke to noise. Not the usual kind. The distant hum of traffic, the neighbor's dog barking at nothing, the groan of old pipes. But something louder. Stranger. A steady rhythmic honking, like a dozen car horns playing the same note over and over. Her eyes flew open. For a second, she thought it was a dream. Some leftover worry from the night before twisting into sound. But no, the honking was real and it was close. Too close. She sat up, heart pounding, and shuffled to the window. The curtains were thin, faded from years of sun, but she could see shapes moving outside. Big shapes. Metal shapes. She pulled the fabric aside just enough to peek out. Her street, usually quiet at this hour, just a few early walkers and the occasional delivery van, was packed. Not with one or two cars, but with a whole line of them. Bumper to bumper parked crookedly along both sides. A red pickup with a dented fender. A white minivan with soccer balls rolling in the back. A food truck with bright yellow lettering and its side awning already open, steam curling from a vent. People were getting out, carrying bags, boxes, even coolers. Some wore pajamas. Others had work uniforms. A woman in a floral apron was unfolding a folding table on the sidewalk. She blinked hard, thinking maybe she was still asleep. But the cold floor under her feet felt real. The smell of coffee, real coffee, not her sugar water, drifted through the cracked window. Her breath caught in her throat. What was happening? She threw on the first thing she could find, a sweater with a loose thread at the cuff, and slipped on her slippers. She didn't even think to check her hair or wipe the sleep from her eyes. She just opened the front door and stepped out into the cool morning air. The honking stopped the second she appeared. Silence fell, sudden and soft, like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. Then footsteps. A woman walked toward her, mid-50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, wearing a cafe apron over sweatpants. She carried a paper bag that smelled like warm bread. "You're awake," the woman said, not as a question but like a relief. She just stood there, arms crossed over her chest, confused and wary. What's all this?" The woman smiled gently. "We heard. Not from you, never from you. But people talk. The bus driver sees you walking home in the rain with no coat. The school nurse noticed your boy's been missing days. His teacher saw the note you left." She paused, then added, "And Rosa, the barista at the corner shop, she's my cousin. She said you haven't bought coffee in weeks, but you still smile when you pass by." She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. She looked past the woman, at the street full of strangers holding grocery bags, medicine bottles, blankets folded neatly over arms. A man in a mechanic's shirt was unloading a box of canned soup from his truck. A teenager carried a stack of children's books. Someone had set up a card table with a coffee thermos and paper cups. "We didn't want to knock," the woman went on. "Didn't want to make you uncomfortable. So we figured we'd just show up. Block the street if we had to. Make sure you couldn't pretend we weren't here." She shook her head slowly. I didn't ask for this." "No," the woman said softly. "You never do." "That's the problem." A lump rose in her chest. She looked down at her slippers, at the frayed edge of her sweater. She wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, "My son. He needs his medicine." "We know," the woman said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small white bag with the pharmacy logo on it. "Got it this morning, full dose. Refills covered for the next 3 months." She pressed it into her hands. The weight of it, so small, so ordinary, felt like a miracle. She clutched it like it might vanish if she let go. Inside the house, her son stirred, calling out sleepily. "Mom, I'm here," she called back, her voice cracking. The woman nodded toward the door. "Go, give it to him. We'll be here when you're ready." She turned and went back inside, moving like someone in a dream. In his room, he was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. "What's all the noise?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She sat on the edge of his bed, opened the bag, and took out the inhaler. Brand new, full, the blue cap gleaming in the morning light. She showed it to him. His eyes widened. "Is that for me?" She nodded, unable to speak. She helped him take his first puff. Then another. They sat together in silence, listening to his breath deepen, smooth out, fill his lungs the way it was supposed to. For the first time in weeks, it didn't sound like a struggle. It just sounded like breathing. When she stepped back outside, the street hadn't emptied. If anything, more people had arrived. Someone had brought a folding chair and set it out for her. She sat down, still holding the empty pharmacy bag like a talisman. The woman in the apron handed her a cup of real coffee. Black, just how she used to take it before she stopped buying it. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just drink. Rest. Let people care for once." She took a sip. The warmth spread through her chest deeper than caffeine. It felt like being seen. A man with a toolbox walked over. "Heard your kitchen sink's been dripping," he said. "I'll fix it after breakfast. No charge." A young woman with a baby in a carrier offered a container of soup. "Homemade. Freezer's full. Thought you could use a hot meal." No one asked for thanks. No one made her feel small. They just showed up, like they'd been waiting for a reason to do something kind, and she'd unknowingly given them one. She looked down the street at the cars, the people, the steam rising from the food truck, and realized something. She hadn't been invisible. Not really. People had noticed. They'd been watching not to judge, but to help. And today they'd decided enough was enough. She took another sip of coffee. It tasted like hope. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe it might actually be real. The first real change came in the form of a paper bag left on her doorstep the next morning. Inside were groceries, real ones, not just rice and beans. Apples, eggs, a loaf of bread still warm from the bakery, even a small carton of milk. Taped to the handle was a note. "Eat something with protein. You're no good to him if you collapse, no name. Just kindness, plain and simple." She stood there holding the bag, tears welling up for the first time in months. Not tears of sadness, but of disbelief. like her body couldn't process that someone had thought of her, not just her son. She made scrambled eggs that morning, the smell filling the apartment like a promise. Her son ate 2 helpings and asked for a third. She let him. At work, things were different too. The building manager stopped by while she was mopping the lobby. He didn't say much, just handed her an envelope. Inside was a check. Overtime, he muttered, though she hadn't logged any extra hours. She looked up to thank him, but he was already walking away, whistling like it was just another Tuesday. Then came the yard sale. It showed up on a Saturday morning on the empty lot 2 blocks down. A hand-painted sign read, "Community clean out, everything must go." She walked past it on her way to the pharmacy for the refill. Yes, there was a refill now, paid for by a mystery donor, the clerk said with a wink, and paused. Tables were covered with mismatched mugs, old books, lamps with frayed cords. Nothing fancy. But the prices, they were absurd. A chipped teacup for $25, a paperback novel for $40, a child's raincoat barely used for $60. She frowned, confused. Then she saw the retired teacher from down the street holding up a coffee mug to a young couple. "Excellent condition," the woman said seriously. "And it holds heat like you wouldn't believe. Worth every penny." That's when it clicked. This wasn't a yard sale. It was a cover. A quiet, clever way to raise money without making her feel like charity was being handed down. She turned away quickly, pressing a hand to her mouth. Not out of shame, but because her heart felt too big for her chest. She never went back to that yard sale. But she started noticing other things. The hardware store owner began slipping extra light bulbs into her grocery bag when she bought soap. The bus driver stopped a block early so she wouldn't have to walk in the rain. Even the laundromat attendant started saving the dryer closest to the heater for her on cold days. Her son's health improved faster than she expected. With the medicine working properly, his cough faded. He started running again, really running, chasing friends after school, coming home flushed and breathless in the best way. He drew more spaceships, but now they had names: the Hope, the Neighbor, the Blue Inhaler. She kept every drawing pinned to the fridge. One afternoon, she found herself standing in the community garden, a patch of soil between 2 apartment buildings that most people ignored. She'd passed it for years, never thinking it was for people like her. But that day, on impulse, she walked in. An older man with dirt under his nails handed her a trowel. "Tomatoes need thinning," he said, like she'd been coming for years. She knelt in the soil, the sun warm on her back, and worked in silence. No one asked her story. No one offered help she didn't ask for. They just let her be part of something. That became her new routine. After work, instead of going straight home, she'd stop by the garden for an hour. She learned how to prune basil, how to tell when peppers were ripe, how to keep aphids away with soapy water. The work was quiet, steady, and it gave her hands something to do besides worry. She started eating regularly, not just when her son was watching, but because she wanted to. Because her body deserved fuel. She bought real coffee again. Not every day, but sometimes. On Sundays, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup and watch the steam curl into the air, savoring the small luxury of it. One evening, as she walked home from the garden, she passed the food truck that had been parked on her street that morning weeks ago. It was open for business now, parked legally by the park. The owner, a woman with bright earrings and a tattoo of a sunflower on her forearm, saw her and waved her over. "Hey, the street hero," she called with a grin. She laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "I'm no hero. You're the reason half this neighborhood talks to each other now," the woman said, handing her a wrapped burrito. "On the house. And don't argue, I've got 3 kids and a food truck. I know stubborn when I see it." She took it, touched. "Thank you." "No," the woman said, pointing a wooden spoon at her. "Thank you. You reminded us we're not just strangers sharing a zip code. We're a block. A community, people." She walked home eating the burrito, spicy, full of beans and roasted peppers, and realized she hadn't felt this light in years. Not because her problems were gone, rent was still due, the leak in the ceiling still dripped, but because she wasn't carrying it all alone anymore. The real shift wasn't in her bank account. It was in her posture, in the way she held her head a little higher on the bus, in the way she smiled at neighbors instead of looking down, in the way she started asking, "How are you?" and actually waiting for the answer. She even began volunteering, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She helped organize a school supply drive, sorting pencils and notebooks at the community center. She stayed late to pack backpacks, her hands moving with purpose. One night, a teenager came in looking for extra notebooks. She recognized him. He lived 3 doors down, always wore headphones, never spoke to anyone. She handed him a backpack without asking questions. He mumbled a thanks, but before he left, he said, "My mom says you're the reason our building got that new heater." She just nodded. We look out for each other now, and that was the truth. The cars that blocked her street hadn't just delivered medicine and groceries. They delivered something harder to name: belonging, dignity. The quiet understanding that asking for help isn't weakness, it's how humans survive. She still worked hard, still saved every penny she could. But now, when she counted the coins in the tin, she didn't feel desperate. She felt ready, for whatever came next, good or hard, because she knew she wouldn't face it alone. "He once did it for me," she said simply. "And it changed everything." A pause. Then slowly the young woman stood. She didn't say much as they walked, just kept her hands tucked in her sleeves, eyes on the ground. But when they reached the apartment, she stopped at the door and whispered, "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," she replied, opening the door. Everyone deserves a hot drink and a quiet place to breathe. Inside, she put the kettle on. While it heated, she pulled out 2 mugs, the good ones, the ones with the tiny chips she'd kept because they'd been her mother's. She set out honey, a lemon, a plate of store-bought cookies she'd been saving for a treat. Small things, human things. They sat at the table, steam rising between them. At first, silence. Then, slowly, the young woman began to talk about a job she'd lost, a baby due in 3 months, a landlord who wouldn't fix the heat. Not all at once, not in a flood, but in pieces, like she was testing the water. And she listened. Not to fix, not to solve, just to hear. When the woman left an hour later, her eyes were clearer. She didn't have a solution yet, but she had a phone number, a list of local resources, and the quiet certainty that she wasn't invisible. After she left, she washed the mugs, wiped the table, and sat for a moment in the quiet. Outside, the neighborhood carried on. Kids biking home from school, a dog barking, someone laughing on a porch. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just life unfolding in small, connected moments. Later that week, she got a call from the community center. They were starting a support group for parents navigating medical costs, and they asked if she'd be willing to share her story, not as a hero, but as someone who'd been there. She said yes, not because she wanted attention, but because if her truth could help even one person feel less alone, it was worth telling. She still worked cleaning offices, still saved every dollar she could, but now she also taught a Saturday gardening class at the community plot. She showed kids how to plant seeds, how to wait, how to trust that something good can grow even in hard soil. Her son came sometimes, proudly showing off his row of carrots. He didn't know it, but he was learning more than gardening. He was learning how to care. One evening, as they walked home from the garden, he asked, "Mom, do you think we're lucky?" She thought about it. "I don't know if it's luck," she said. "I think it's people choosing to be kind when it would have been easier not to." He nodded like that made perfect sense, and maybe it did. Because the truth was, the cars that blocked her street that morning hadn't magically fixed her life. But they'd shown her something vital. That community isn't just a word. It's action. It's showing up even when it's messy. It's seeing someone struggle and saying, not on my watch." Now when she passes the pharmacy, she doesn't look away. When she hears a cough in the night, she doesn't panic. And when she sees someone sitting alone on a stoop, shoulders heavy with worry, she doesn't walk faster. She slows down, because kindness, once given, doesn't disappear. It echoes, it spreads. It finds its way back, not always to you, but through you into someone else's story. And that's how ordinary streets become places where miracles happen, one quiet act at a time.